A lot of weird surprises on the Minnesota Vikings 53-man roster, including 7 undrafted free agent rookies. Why do it that way? We'll investigate on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. You all make the world go round. Today on the show, of course, we are going over everything that happened on Cutdown Day. 53-man rosters are now set, but they are not locked, and a lot of stuff could still happen today. So the same thing I said yesterday goes today. An emergency podcast is not out of the question if a big trade happens. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner, and the FanDuel app, visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. So, the Vikings have set a 53-man roster. We'll go over all of it, but I want to start with the lead topic, which is that a lot of weird stuff happened. Maybe the biggest surprise of the 53-man cutdowns is that the Vikings released Gabe Murphy. That's kind of crazy to me. He played really well. He was clearly a very good player, and they kept somebody much lesser at everything but special teams in Chaz Chambliss. Chaz Chambliss is one of the big surprise makes on the roster. For my prediction last time, I got 6 people wrong, including Mekhi Blackman, who I had on my projection but hadn't recorded the episode yet, but I'm not giving myself a mulligan on it. So I got 6 of them wrong. That's a pretty bad year for me, but I really felt like that was going to happen. I had a tough time predicting what they would do, considering that there were only 48 or 49 guys that felt like true locks. And not only was I wrong about a couple of those things, I was really wrong about what they would do about it. So again, we'll go over the whole thing, but the first thing I want to investigate is one of the theories for why the Vikings would keep 7 undrafted rookies on their roster. And Kevin Seifert had a tweet speculating about this that has taken on some legs, and I've got asked a couple of times already. I'm sure it's going to be all over the mailbag, so let's handle it. He has 3 reasons, and he says all of these can be true to some degree, right? Team is either holding enough through the first day of waivers and trying to sneak some of these guys to the practice squad. Could happen. So some of these guys could get cut anyways, and this could, totally be nothing by the time you listen to this. The team is run up against its cash budget, or they're just good players that made the team. And it's that second one that got people a little bit riled up, especially Minnesota sports fans who are also Twins fans and are extremely sensitive to the idea of a team not wanting to spend the cash necessary to make their team as good as possible. I need to assure you that not only is there very little evidence that anything Pollard-like is happening with the Vikings, but that it would be pretty impossible for that to go down that way anyways, because the NFL has a different CBA. There is a cash spending floor. You have to, over the course of 3 years, average 90% of the cap. So you can dip below the cash floor in 1 year as long as you make it up on either side of it, but over any given 3-year period, it has to average out to 90% of the cap. So you can't just not spend money on your players. You can't do what a baseball team can do and just cheap out and say, I'm just, glad if the operation is profitable, not if they're winning, which I think is the accusation people are levying at the Twins right now. Go listen to Locked On Twins for more about that. I don't know too much about that thing, but I get it. Y'all are sensitive, and I want to assuage your concern. But beyond that, and Seifert also pointed this out in a later response, the Vikings have spent $350 million on their players. That is third most in the league, and maybe their budget is around $350 million and they're already up against it or whatever, but the idea of the Wilfs cheaping out can't be the case. They're already spending as much. The only 2 teams above them are the Chiefs and the Bills. Those are the only 2 teams spending more in total cash on their roster this year. There's a big difference between cash and cap. And it's important to understand that if you want to understand why contracts are the way that they are. When you guarantee somebody money, you have to produce all of the cash that will be guaranteed over the entire life of the contract up front, and then you put it in escrow where it's going to be paid out on whatever schedule that you've agreed to with the player. So anytime you guarantee money, that is cash up front in that year. So any free agent signing, big extensions like Darrisaw's or Jefferson's, the entire sum of that guaranteed money got set aside in 1 year. The Bengals have been struggling with this a lot because they had extensions for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins with big upfront guaranteed money that they had to set aside. And then that was part of the reason they had trouble re-signing Trey Hendrickson, and Trey Hendrickson eventually had to agree to something with a lot less guarantees than I think he wanted. That is a thing. And to Seifert's point, which he again said in a response as people went crazy off of the cash budget thing, he said, like every business has a budget. No business operates without a budget for everything. Everybody has a set amount of money that they intend to spend every year. If you run a business and you don't have budgets, I don't know what you're doing. So of course, all 32 teams are going to have some upper limit. At a certain point, $1.5 million or $1.5 billion in upfront cash is not going to be tenable for that franchise. And somewhere between ridiculous numbers and numbers that are like just hitting the cash spending floor and moving on, somewhere between that are going to be where most teams actually lie, and the Vikings lie on the higher end of things. But it's not wrong of Seifert to say that there is a budget. At some point, there is an amount of money that the business of the Vikings and therefore the Wilfs are not going to be willing to spend. That's just a truism. I think bringing it up, I think he's trying to needle people a little bit, to be honest. But that's not wrong. But I do think that the theory that they've run up against their cash budget can't quite be true. Because if you look at the actual decisions in question, very few, if any of them, actually save the Vikings money. So the big one that I am surprised by, and I think most of you are surprised the most by, Gabriel Murphy over Chaz Chambliss. At least according to Over the Cap, their cash is exactly the same. They're both scheduled to make an $840,000. I think that's like the undrafted, set amount, $840,000 in salary. I'm pretty sure that that's the correct number. I don't know Over the Cap to estimate on the lower ends of the roster like that, even though everybody is listed at 840 at a certain point. I don't know Over the Cap to be guessing there. But if they are, it would be a very small nickel and dime anyways. So I have no reason to think that Gabe Murphy would have made more than Chaz Chambliss. And in fact, Bo Richter, who also makes the team instead of Gabe Murphy, despite Gabe Murphy pretty clearly outplaying Bo Richter, is actually more expensive. So if they wanted to cut somebody different to save a little bit of cash up front and stay under their budget for 2025, they would have cut Bo Richter instead of Gabe Murphy. So that doesn't make sense to me. And if you go down the roster to all the other keeps that they made that I guess were surprising to me. They kept Tim Jones. I was surprised by that. I didn't think that would happen. Well, he's making over $1 million, and they could have kept Lucky Jackson, who is cheaper. They are also keeping Tavier Thomas over somebody like Zemiah Vaughn or Dwight McGlothern, both of whom are much cheaper. So that doesn't explain the bottom roster decisions that you might be surprised by. That might still be true, that at a certain point, they've spent a lot of cash this year and there will come a limit at some point, but these 53-man roster decisions don't sound like that is the case. I wanted to be really clear about that, especially for you Vikings and Twins fans that are going to suddenly feel a disturbance in the force when owner cash limitations start coming into play. Doesn't look like it. If they were really worried about saving cash, they would have made a lot of different decisions. Instead, I think we have to address those decisions on their merit. So for the rest of the show, I'm going to go through the 53-man roster. We'll go through the surprises and the decisions that they made and how I feel about them, why I think I was wrong, or why I think I'm still right, but I just disagree that they did it. Because there are some cases where, sometimes I'm like, hey, Andre Carter shouldn't have made the team. And I turned out vindicated about that. And I just believed in the Vikings too much. Sometimes that happens. Blind squirrels and broken clocks. So we'll go through all of that next on the Locked On Vikings podcast. This episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Yahoo Fantasy. Kickoff is coming, and you can feel that fantasy football in the air. This is like the most popular time to have your fantasy draft, to set up your fantasy league. So if you still haven't done that, consider using fantasy football. I'm playing fantasy football on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran creating your millionth league. It's loaded with all kinds of fun ways to compete, ranging from your classic redraft leagues, dynasty keepers, and even some weird off-the-wall ones. With season kickoff on September 4th. Now is the time to start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football, which offers so many fun ways to compete. If you want more ways to play, try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. I'm doing that one for the first time this year, by the way. Want to play instantly with friends? You can try the new Draft with Friends mode, or if you prefer the classics, you can get your crew together and go head-to-head in a private league. And if you don't have a crew that wants to play fantasy football with you, no problem. Join a public league, the easiest way to play. The NFL season kicks off September 4th, so don't wait. Start your league now. Draft now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. Before we move on here on the Locked On Vikings podcast, there is a survey in the show notes I would love for you to check out and take if you can. Let's go through everything that has happened here. Some of this has already been confirmed, like the quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy, Carson Wentz, Max Brosmer. Talked about that on Monday's show. You can go listen there. At running back, I actually agonized over the decision of whether or not to keep both Xavier Scott and Ty Chandler, and even had that in a previous version of my 53-man roster. I waffled. There was a couple of rumors they were trying to trade Ty Chandler. Those must not have materialized. Ty Chandler made the final roster. I took him off of mine. I think I overthought it, but that was sort of in the air. And I do think that Ty Chandler and Xavier Scott both making the roster, of course, Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason, the other two, leading to 4 running backs. But both of those guys making the roster, they are redundant with each other, and I don't know if it's going to stay. But Xavier Scott, here's one of those undrafted rookies. That guy doesn't replace a more expensive player per se. In fact, they kept 2. If it was Xavier Scott over Ty Chandler, and we all felt that Ty Chandler had played better and that couldn't have explained the move, then it would feel like a cash thing. It could feel like a cash thing, but this very much doesn't. And by the way, Xavier Scott 100% earned his roster spot. It's whether or not they kept Ty Chandler, which again, if you're trying to save money, Ty Chandler's base salary is $1.1 million, not a penny of it guaranteed. So if you wanted to save money, that would have been a pretty easy one. And he looks like he kind of lost his job anyways in camp. I think they just didn't have anybody else to put on the roster instead. Here's an interesting thing though. CJ Ham on injured reserve. Designation to return, but CJ Ham will now be out for the first 4 weeks of the season. Not on injured reserve with a designation to return is Jalen Nailor. That's a big one. Jalen Nailor being on the active roster. The implication is they think that there's at least a chance, maybe not a guarantee, but a chance that he won't miss a full 4 weeks. He could still maybe only miss 1 or maybe none. Kevin O'Connell just said week to week and didn't really give any more detail at all. So we still kind of have no idea the extent of his hand injury, but we at least know that they don't anticipate that it keeps him out for more than a month of the regular season. As for the fullback situation, the Vikings don't have one on the roster right now. They could be waiting for one on waivers. They could end up just not doing that, just have Josh Oliver line up in line, run more 12 personnel. It would be a bummer because you do lose a portion of the playbook that uses a fullback, and having somebody like Josh Oliver playing in the I formation rather than in line, like not as a wing, is a little different. Plus, CJ Ham was the designated pass protector on third downs last year. I don't know who you're giving that to, if that's a Jordan Mason thing or if that's an Aaron Jones thing still. They didn't love the pass protection from either of those two guys, and both Xavier Scott and Ty Chandler have a history of issues there too. So I'm not sure who the third down pass protector is going to be. Maybe you put a tight end in there. Maybe you just have Josh Oliver do it. But I'll be curious to see their problem solving there. As for the wide receivers, of course, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Nailor on the active roster, like we just said, Ty Felton, and then 2 that might be surprising. I did have Miles Price on my 53-man roster. I put him in right at the end, thought the returns were just enough, and the fact that there wasn't a lot of roster pressure was important. In something of a surprise, Lucky Jackson did get cut over Tim Jones. By the way, another example, Tim Jones is more expensive than Lucky Jackson. So if they were really, really worried about it, they could have done it differently, but they clearly just think Tim Jones is better than Lucky Jackson. I don't think that there's another way to explain that. I don't necessarily agree Tim Jones had some trouble with special teams, but maybe they're just a little bit more forgiving of penalties than I was, or than the general public is, or especially a place like PFF, where, let's be honest, a lot of you are still getting your opinions, and I know it, is extraordinarily unforgiving of penalties. And maybe the Vikings are more forgiving of penalties, and therefore they see him as more of a help on special teams than we do. That could be a totally valid explanation. But this wide receiver group is, let's be honest, bad at the bottom. You have Justin Jefferson, and then Jalen Naylor at 2 is not great. Obviously, Addison's coming back. It's not a long-term issue. But everybody else doesn't seem to be really ready to contribute from scrimmage, I don't think. And I think an add has to be made to this room, which is why I am not giving myself, I'm not letting myself like finalize my score here on how I did on a 53-man roster until at least tomorrow. If there is a trade, I'm counting it, because I did predict that there would be a free agent pickup or some kind of trade added to this wide receiver room, and I still very much think that has to be the case. As for tight end, of course, Hawkinson and Oliver. Ben Urasek was sort of penciled in as the tight end 3 the whole time. That does turn out to be true. Here's another undrafted free agent that is very much not going to be a cash thing. Gavin Bartholomew probably would have been able to win this job, but he has a back injury, and report from Alec Lewis is that it will keep him out for the entire season. He is on season-ending IR. There is no designation to return. So even if he does get healthy now, he cannot return for the Vikings. He could only be waived with an injury settlement if that happens, but the expectation is that he will be out for the year with this back injury. On the offensive line, the 9 that I've been talking about all year made it. One note, if you are haven't been listening, those 9 are Darisaw, Donovan Jackson, Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, Brian O'Neill, your 5 starters that have been the starters all offseason. And then Justin School, Blake Brandel, Walter Rouse, and Michael Juergens. On Michael Juergens, I spent a long time, a lot of air this offseason, on Michael Juergens having a really rough preseason, and the sort of disconnection between the way that the reporters talked about how the team felt about Michael Juergens and what we had seen from him. Team was super high on him, but he struggled a lot in the preseason last year. And I wanted to investigate this because I think the team really sees him as a potential long-term option. Ryan Kelly is not a long-term option, right? They see him as maybe a successor to Ryan Kelly once they decide, whenever that experiment is over, that Michael Juergens might be able to take over and like John Sullivan this. That's a lot, but that's an option that they are open to, and it didn't really make sense to me. I went back and looked a lot closer at both of the preseason games he played. He didn't play in Tennessee, and I super get it, and I'm making a Patreon video about it. I actually think that there is absolutely a chance of that, especially with another year to maybe bulk up a little bit more. The 10th O-line, which I didn't think would happen here, was Joe Huber. I definitely thought about it. This didn't catch me off guard. But I ultimately just didn't think he played well enough in the second 2 preseason games to make it, and I guess I'm just wrong about that. So Joe Huber makes it as the 10th offensive lineman. I think they have a really, really solid depth of O-line, and you know how excited I am about the front 5. So I feel really excited about this O-line group, maybe as much as I ever have since, Adrian Peterson and Randy Moss was on the team. Like, it's been a while. All in all, this offensive roster, now that it has been set and it's ready, feels very complete. You've got a quarterback situation. You've got a backup you feel good about. You've got J.J. McCarthy. They're ready to roll with him for better or worse. They have answers everywhere except at the depth of wide receiver. The depth of wide receiver is really bad. The depth of O-line, great. Depth of tight end, Ben Urasek or whatever. Their depth at running back and quarterback, they feel really good about. Miles Price and Tim Jones ain't moving the needle for me, and I don't think that these guys hold those jobs all the way through week 1 necessarily. So we'll see how that goes. The defense is where a lot more of my concerns lie and where a lot more of the really surprising stuff is for me. So we'll go over that player by player next on the Locked On Vikings podcast. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is a great place to do your betting if you're going to do some gambling because they've got all kinds of great options beyond just like if you're sick of the over-unders or just betting the spread or maybe parlaying a couple. You can do all kinds of weird stuff on FanDuel, but it's also smooth. They pay out instantly, and the app is really easy to use. Add a little bit more energy to a Sunday, especially if it's a Sunday where the Vikings aren't playing. 4 of 5, by the way, Sunday at noon Sundays of the first 5 this week are going to be red zone days for you. The Vikings are on island games 4 of the first 5. So if you want to add a little bit of extra something to that watch, maybe put a parlay of a couple different player props across the league and then watch red zone. I love to do that on days when the Vikings aren't playing at noon. Go ahead and find it at FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, let's get to the defense here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Making the 53 are, as expected, at least 6 defensive linemen. And it's the 6 defensive linemen you probably would have guessed. Again, this is one I kind of overthought, where Elijah Williams, I didn't have him on my 53, not because I didn't think he deserved to, but because I thought he had a hamstring injury and that they would put him on IR with a designation to return. That might still happen. So the way the rules are, if you're going to do IR to designation with a designation to return, you need to put that player on your 53-man roster for a day. And then the next day you put him on IR, that roster spot opens up and you put somebody else there. You can do that with 2 players without waiting the initial day, which is what they did with CJ Ham and Tyler Batty. So they've used those 2, but if they want to put Elijah Williams on IR with the designation to return with his hamstring injury, they would have to wait until Wednesday to do it, which very much still could happen, or maybe his hamstring injury isn't that bad and it's not a big deal. Either way, I want to be 100% clear. He should be on the 53-man roster when healthy. He had a fantastic preseason. He played great. He looks 100% like a rosterable guy that should be on your NFL team. I had Taki Taimani on instead, and Elijah Williams going on to the IR with designation to return. Taki Taimani got released, but this could definitely be overturned by the time you listen to this. Still depends on the severity of his hamstring injury, and if they think his hamstring injury will keep him out for more than 4 weeks, which is pretty common of hamstring injuries. Otherwise, it's the 5 guys that we've come to expect: Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, Jalen Redmond, Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. Levi Drake Rodriguez had very much cemented his position, especially getting that sack against Tennessee, I think was the exclamation point on what has been a really nice summer for him. And just as a side note, looking through day 3 of last year's draft with Walter Rouse, Michael Juergens, Levi Drake Rodriguez, all of those guys really showed out this summer, and it looks like they've taken a step forward in an exciting way. Now, when you get to the linebackers, both inside and outside, we've got the big surprises. We have the Gabe Murphy thing, right? And outside of that, Grenard, Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, of course, Bo Richter, and then no Gabe Murphy. Instead, yes, Chaz Chambliss. That's kind of crazy. Also, in the announcement of the 53-man roster, the final 53-man roster that the Vikings PR put out, they listed Chaz Chambliss above Dallas Turner and Bo Richter. They did the same thing with Ty Chandler and Xavier Scott and Jordan Mason. So they had Ty Chandler above Jordan Mason. I wonder if there's something weird going on with like how they're listing special teamers, because that's almost entirely what Ty Chandler and Chaz Chambliss are going to be doing. Chambliss did have a good special teams, and yesterday I did waffle with the idea of putting Chambliss on my 53, and I actually changed it at the last minute to include Miles Price instead, and I should have had both of them. So that's not wholly surprising to me that he made it. It is crazy surprising that Gabe Murphy got cut. That just does not make sense to me. He did some stuff on special teams. He wasn't as prolific on special teams as, say, Chaz Chambliss or Tim Jones, but he did some, and he wasn't horrible at it. He would have done more in the regular season, like he did when he was active last year, because he did come back in the middle of last year from that injury. And he was really good as a pass rusher. He was incredibly disruptive, and he was very clearly the best D-line on the field once you got, the ones out of there. Like on the second team, he was the best bar none. Him or Bo Richter. He was outplaying Bo Richter, and nobody else behind him did anything. So there was even speculation from K-Fan that he was going to eat into Dallas Turner's snaps. I always thought that was a bit of a bridge too far, but now that's most certainly not true. I'm very, very surprised about it, that they would expose him to waivers and all that stuff too, because this is a guy I don't think you can sneak to the practice squad. I'd be very excited if they could, but let's say, like, there's still hope here. Here's the cope. The hopium copium. Let's say they do put Elijah Williams on IR with a designation to return on Wednesday or Thursday or whatever. That would open up a roster spot. They could bring Gabe Murphy back with that roster spot, but you have to hope he doesn't join another team in the meantime, which is super, super possible. I just don't get it. This is one I cannot. This is one where I'm going to say, okay, yeah, I get you did the special teams thing, and I think you're going to get burned for this. I really do. The same thing happened with Andre Carter. They let Luigi Villon go. He's still in the NFL. He still has a career, and Andre Carter does nothing for you. He gets on the field for like 5 snaps, and they're all hilarious. Wile E. Coyote like destructions. Cornerback. We'll move on. Inside linebacker. So Blake Cashman, Ivan Pace, Eric Wilson, Kobe King. We all kind of knew that. Austin Keys also makes the team. That's pretty surprising and sheds an even worse light on the Brian Asamoah camp, which was going really, really bad. But Austin Keys is another one that is maybe a little bit about special teams, but he also played really well in third team linebacker. I don't think I gave him enough attention for that, but he did play very well. It's definitely a surprise to me. I would have never thought that they would carve out space for a fifth linebacker if that guy's Austin Keys. Because the Vikings are in penny a lot. They're in, 2 linebacker sets almost exclusively. They very rarely play 3. So having a fifth one is like unnecessary depth, but he's got a special teams role. And this is, again, goes to show you how much special teams matters, because everything that has been surprising to most people, the guys that are not on a lot of people's 53-man rosters like Chaz Chambliss and Austin Keys and Tim Jones, it's all about special teams for those guys. And those decisions are made. You need to be good enough from scrimmage to exist on a roster to, be able to, you're going to be suited up, right? And if 2 guys go down in the game, they need to be able to trust you to go in and not ruin the offense or defense. But it's much more important how good you are on special teams, because that is practically what you are actually going to do. And that explains the Austin Keys thing to me. Again, that's another cheaper guy, but if that explains picking him over, Brian Asamoah, sure. And they traded, Asamoah got picked up on waivers, so a lot of any guarantees left on his rookie contract also become the responsibility of the Tennessee Titans. So the Wilfs don't have to pay that. That's great, but that isn't also the craziest thing in the world to believe outside of the cash thing. So I just don't think the cash thing holds water as a theory. So now for the secondary. They have 9 members of the secondary. That is as low as I think I can ever remember the secondary being in Minnesota for as long as I have been covering the team. It's always been 10 or 11. I can't remember a time when it was 9. Maybe you can on the initial 53. And I don't think that it's going to stay this way either. I think somebody is getting added to this room when somebody either gets put on IR or is going to, maybe they'll try to sneak somebody to the practice squad on the second round of waivers, right? It's a lot harder to sneak somebody in on Wednesday than it is on Thursday. So maybe that'll happen with somebody like a Joe Huber. But here are the guys in the secondary. The corners are Byron Murphy, Isaiah Rodgers, Jeff Okudah, and Dwight McGlothern. That is it. No Zamiah Vaughn. No Mekhi Blackman. He got traded on Monday. Zamiah Vaughn, I think, definitely had a chance and just didn't play well enough in the preseason. I think this is very much a guy that the preseason cost it for him. I think he really had a shot. But the Van Jefferson juke play was horrible, and it wasn't the only mistake he made in that game. So they hope to sneak him through to the practice squad. I think you can, because the other NFL teams are going to consider Zamiah Vaughn by turning on that tape, seeing how he played, and they're going to go, no thanks, unless they all had a big draft grade on him or something. But he went undrafted, so they can't have had that high of one on him. On the idea of sneaking people through to the practice squad, by the way, Arif Hassan released a piece on Wide Left examining the numbers on that, on how easy it is to sneak a guy through to the practice squad. And essentially, unless your guy was drafted or played really well in the preseason, you have a 3% chance of that guy getting poached. you're pretty much going to get the guy to the practice squad by and large for the most part. But if they played well, the odds go to like 10% to get poached. Or if they're a draft pick, they get a lot higher, because if you drafted someone in the 5th round, chances are other teams had draftable grades on them as well, and some teams can think that they're getting a Theo Jackson here. That's exactly what happened with the Vikings and Theo Jackson. He was a 6th round pick. The Titans cut him, tried to sneak him to waivers, and the Vikings said, well, suddenly it's like getting a 6th round pick for free because we can get that guy we had a 6th round grade on, or draftable, or whatever grade they actually had on him, and now he's like part of their team and giving you value. At safety, Harrison Smith, Josh Metellus, Theo Jackson, Jay Ward, no surprises there. And then Tavierre Thomas, who I did put at the last second, I put in on my 53-man roster. I actually think he's the one I put in instead of Chaz Chambliss. But either way, I was rocking a hard place. I was always going to be 1-1 there. Tavierre Thomas makes it. Again, this is a special teams thing, but this could also be a nickel corner thing. Here's the biggest problem that I have right now with the secondary is a numbers game, right? If you want to tell me, hey, Brian Flores is going to make Isaiah Rodgers and Jeff Okudah good corners all of a sudden, I'm very skeptical, and I went on a whole rant about it yesterday, but we'll set that aside for now. I'll give you that for now. Dwight McGlothern is exclusively an outside corner. Jeff Okudah is an outside corner. Isaiah Rodgers is an outside corner. Right now, the only inside corner under contract for the Minnesota Vikings is Byron Murphy. If he twists his ankle, there is nobody to play inside. Not nobody good, nobody period. Tavierre Thomas did play inside, though, for a lot of his career. They have moved him to safety, and they had him playing deep safety all preseason. So if you want him to play nickel, you've now made him rusty out at that. And I think that would be a pretty big unforced error, considering that you traded away Mekhi Blackman. Like, nobody did this to you. You are not in this circumstance because of an injury or an unforeseen circumstance. You on purpose traded Mekhi Blackman. You on purpose moved Tavierre Thomas out of the nickel corner position. And now, if they had to play tomorrow and Murphy wasn't available, it probably would be him. That's concerning. It's a job he's held before. He's a veteran with starting experience. So I'm not I wouldn't be too worried about it, except for the fact that they thought it would be a good idea to move him to safety. To sort of caveat this, the difference between safety and nickel corner in the Brian Flores defense is not that big. Sometimes they do the exact same thing. Sometimes they do super similar things. And as long as you know how to play all the zones, you should be okay. So maybe I'm over worrying about this, but either way, that cornerback group, I'm sorry, it's not good. There is one player that has started a season, let alone a good one. One player, and that's Byron Murphy. There's only 3 other guys in that cornerback room. And one of your safeties, by the way, is the backup to the guy who had the job last year. So like by definition, that group got worse too. I love Josh Metellus. I love Harrison Smith, and I do think that there's some potential for Theo Jackson, but there's a lot of tough sells that the Vikings are asking you to just sort of trust the coaches on. I think you have to draw a line somewhere to how much worse the personnel can be, and you're still justifying it with, yeah, the coaches will just figure it out. I think somebody has to get added here. They have to. If they roll into the week 1 with this group, I will be very, very, very critical of that. I don't think they're going to roll into week 1 with this group, though. So I'll put my panic on hold for now. And at both wide receiver and at corner, I do think acquisitions are coming. I think 2 new Vikings are going to join here still. So we'll see who joins, who ends up not on the roster tomorrow. And maybe I'll get into some of the Michael Juergens stuff if I get that Patreon done, or we'll start previewing the season. I mean, we've now got a week and change to preview the NFL season, and like next Thursday is not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow is crossover Thursday. Like, we're here, we made it. I will see you all for that, and as always, Skull.